Hi, in this video I'm talking about why fighting anxiety is a very poor strategy. In fact, it's so poor it's positively counterproductive. You can never eradicate anxiety by fighting anxiety. And if you think about what the nature of a fight is, at least sort of two elements, two people, two kind of constructs, two ideas, right, in conflict. Well, if you rub your hands together enough, you get friction, right? Because you've got two surfaces which are abrading against each other, creating energy, and that's fight. When you fight anxiety, you're creating the energy that perpetuates, it feeds, it maintains anxiety. It's a very, very poor strategy. Now, having said it's so poor, virtually everybody fights anxiety, at least in the first instance, because it's the obvious thing to do, right? We fight the thing that we don't want in our life. But eventually, people come to the realization that it's just actually not a very useful thing to do. They start to do some useful strategies and then they start to move on. So, fighting anxiety invites anxiety. What we want to do is to have a new way of thinking about it, a new strategy, some new tools that allows anxiety to be starved of energy, starved of emotion, starved of the things that keep it strong. There are tons of classic experiments in psychology, but the one I want to talk about today is called the white bear experiment. And actually it's very classic in the sense that it's really pertinent to what we're talking about today. A researcher asked two groups of people, one group to think about the white bear, another group to not think about a white bear. Later on, he said to them which group has the most kind of spontaneous thoughts about the white bear. Well, which group do you think it is? The ones that were allowed to think about the white bear, or the ones that were not allowed to think about the white bear? Well, the ones that were not allowed to think about the white bear had the most spontaneous, intrusive thoughts about the white bear. And that is like a fundamental experiment that shows you that trying not to think about something is a poor strategy. If you think about the things that you worry about, and if you were to talk to some friends, I'm worried about this, they'd say things like, well, don't worry about it. Don't think about it. Let it, just, try not to think about it, And that's really terrible advice, because what science has showed us is that we have to experience our experience for it to be integrated into our psyche. If we try to deny or push away our experience, it stands outside, it can't be processed, and that keeps it kind of active and alive. So how do we go about taking some first steps to accepting anxiety? Okay, so let's think about this. You are probably having experiences of anxiety. Now, if you've had experiences of anxiety for a considerable period of time, you will be frightened of having anxiety. You'll be apprehensive about having it. You'll put probably quite a lot of effort into avoiding people, places and things that are likely to provoke anxiety. And you'll be very sensitive to what your body's doing as indicators that you're going to have an anxiety attack. Now, all of those things that I've just described generate the emotion of fear. And fear is the emotion at the heart of anxiety, right? So being anxious about being anxious, being apprehensive, avoiding people's places and things, all of these things are ways of managing fear. But they're also caused by the fear of fear. Anxiety uses the emotion of fear to give you the experience that you have. So instead of pushing it away, instead of not thinking about it, not talking about it, what we're going to do is we're going to allow it to be what it is. We're going to experience it, but this time we're not going to do anything with it that feeds it. We're going to allow it to exist. So I would suggest, and I've done this many times with clients, you simply close your eyes and you allow the experience to be where it is. You locate it in your body. Is it in your chest? Is it in your stomach? Is it in your head? Wherever it is, we locate it and we focus our attention on it. And just take a little bit of time to think about it like this. Be curious about it. Be a detective. Sort of interrogate it a little bit. Let's say, okay, if I want to experience your experience, you have to describe it to me so I can imagine it, right? So, like, when you experience the anxiety in your body, is it like a heavy bunch of chain? Is it like a coiled rope? Is it like springs? Is it like wire? What would you describe it as? Now, if that's too difficult, simply say, okay, what color is it? What color is this feeling that you have? How big is it? How small is it? Is it heavy? Is it light? Does it have a texture? Is it rough? Is it dark, black? Whatever it is. Just allow it to be what it is, right? But picture it. You're experiencing it anyway. Picture it and recognize it. And accept that that is what is happening in you right now. And accept that it's kind of interesting in a sense to think of it in a new way. Allow it to increase, allow it to decrease, allow it to do whatever it wants, because it would do whatever it wants anyway. We're not fighting it, we're just observing it, okay? And when you observe your anxiety in a sort of slightly dispassionate way, as a detective observing, as a researcher observing, as an animal behaviorist observing, as a visitor to the zoo observing, as you observe this behavior of your anxiety, you often find that the anxiety is no longer being fed with fear. And when it's no longer being fed with fear, it starts to subside. And when it subsides, it's replaced with the opposite of arousal, which is calm. And so you can often notice a difference. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do this as a tool to fight anxiety. I'm suggesting you do this as a tool to take the energy out of anxiety. If you take the energy out of anxiety, if you stop feeding it fear, then anxiety obviously has to go down, because anxiety is an overestimation of threat. It's always about threat, and therefore it always requires fear. Let me give you a couple of metaphors, a couple of ways just to think about it, because you have to be able to kind of think about it in a way that's useful to you. Look at this picture of a Chinese finger trap. When you put your finger in each end of a Chinese finger trap, the harder you pull the trap apart, the more your finger is trapped. The way to get out of a Chinese finger trap is not to fight it, is in fact to push into the finger trap to release the straps. Imagine you've got a bee buzzing around you. Now, I'm always amazed with beekeepers. Some beekeepers don't even wear protective kit, but it's possible to get really close to bees if you're calm and you're kind of basically not doing anything really very, very unexpected and sort of thrashing around, right? So if you've got a bee buzzing around you, you can swat the bee, you can run away, and the bee gets agitated, or you can just allow the bee to be what it is, because the bee is not really interested in you, it's doing its own thing. So if you fight a bee, it makes the problem worse, and if you don't fight a bee, the bee just gets on and does what it was doing anyway. It's not really interested in you. By fighting the bee, you're creating an interest, you're attracting it to you, you're making it feel like it's got to do something. So anxiety is fueled by fear. And by becoming curious about what's happening inside your body, we're starting to take the fear out of it, and we're doing something different from pushing it away or fighting it. We're becoming curious about it. Now, you might say, well, anxiety is an enemy. Fine. Okay, it's okay for anxiety to be an enemy. But you still want to know what the enemy is doing. You still have to have an understanding of the enemy. You still have to have, in a sense, intelligence to be able to recognize the enemy's strategy. So that's what you're doing, right? You're paying attention to what your anxiety is doing. And when you do that, it's an alternative to being in a perpetual conflict that you can never, ever win. Thanks for taking the time to watch and listen. I'm Dr. David Purvis.